Okay, so my name's Tony Bennett. I'm a researcher here in the Institute for Culture and Society, and we're here today to talk to Gay Hawkins about a book that she and two colleagues, Emily Porter and Kane Race, a terrific book, have just published on plastic water. So Gay, if I can start, just what was it that first got you interested in the topic of bottled water, which you now evocatively call plastic water? How did you first become interested in this topic, and what kind of issues do you think are at stake in its analysis?
Well, it's not often you can pinpoint the start of a research idea, but with this one I can, because I can remember very clearly the day when I walked into a first year lecture and just was preparing and looked up at the steeped audience and just saw about 400 plastic bottles of water sitting on desks looking at me waiting for the lecture to begin, and I just thought, gee, that's a new phenomenon. Last year, there would have been a few bottles, maybe Coke, but suddenly everyone had a bottle of water with them as a sort of personal accessory, and I just thought, how did that change come about? It's fairly rapid. It seems like I am standing here witnessing a new habit. So just from that, a whole lot of questions proliferated about, yes, a social change. How would you go about explaining that? And when I started to research it, it seemed like there were a lot of answers already out there, but I found them very unsatisfactory. There were answers like, oh, this is the corporatization or the privatization of water. This is the blatant manipulation of consumers, sort of making people pay for something they already get pretty cheaply. This is the rise, more evidence of neoliberalism, the rise of risk society. I found all those explanations extremely inadequate. Mm-hmm. And I felt that they took you away from the actual bottle and the water and the new drinking practice. So I just felt, well, what's at stake here is a whole lot of very subtle changes in everyday life, in the ways in which water is being provided, in the ways in which people are relating to it. So I wanted to, develop another line of thinking about this phenomena that asked a whole series of how questions, rather than, rushing to judgment and rushing to critique.
It's a good story and as good a case of a kind of teaching research synergy as you could ask for.
Yes.
But okay, so obviously you were interested in the phenomena of the plastic bottle and of the new kind of habits, practices connected with this. You make a reference early in the book to bottled water as part of a new water reality. I thought that was a great concept, a water reality, but could you say a little bit about what you mean by a water reality and what's most distinctive about the water reality that's tied up with bottled water?
Yeah, well, obviously what we wanted to think about was, if you're interested in water realities, then you're interested in what kind of practices are being done here. So I had a very ontological approach to the question. I wanted to think about what modes of being is a bottle of water sort of inaugurating, what new modes of being, and how might those new modes of being, such as drinking water from a bottle, how would they be interrupting or interfering with previous modes of being, previous realities? Mm-hmm. So obviously the bottle was just generating a whole new set of ways of being around water, and they were rubbing up against with and disrupting previous modes of being with water. So if you take an ontological approach to this, then you have to look very closely at how is that reality being assembled, what material elements are part of it, such as what does it mean to drink water from a plastic bottle rather than reach for a tap? What does it mean to drink it more frequently? What does it mean when it's branded? What does it mean to carry it around with you all the time? They're ontological practices. So I wanted to make sense of how they came into being. I guess the other thing that was really distinctive about this was that I suddenly started to realise that there were many different realities associated with the bottle. It wasn't just that it was a new market thing, a new commodity. It was also generating new waste realities, because suddenly I started noticing garbage bins overflowing with plastic bottles, sort of lines of them along the edge of beaches. So one got a sense that this new commodity was creating a proliferating set of new sorts of realities wherever it went.
Oh, that's fantastic, and that comes across in the book. But what also comes across strongly in the book is your argument. It's stronger than an argument. It's an insistence that bottled water isn't just one thing; it's many. That there are multiple kinds of realities that are involved in these new complex ontologies, and in particular, you say it's both the title is plastic water. It's both the plastic and the water. The plastic changes the water changes the plastic. These act on each other and they act on us and within new water realities in complex ways. So can you say a little bit about this, the multiplicity of the agencies that are tied up in this concept of plastic water?
Well, obviously we wanted to wrestle with, well, what is bottled water? And we realised that it's different things in different settings. It does have multiple identities. And it's an unfinished object in a sense. It becomes a different thing as it moves through different sorts of uses and locations and histories. But it was very important then to really make sense of what are the material elements of the actual object that we were wrestling with. So that's why we started the book with the package. You can't get bottled water without a container. It's one of the few commodities that draws attention to its packaging. Most commodities sort of want to hide or disguise packaging. Bottled water draws attention to its packaging. It's water in a bottle. So we wanted to really wrestle with, well, how did that bottle come into being? So the book starts with a history of polyethylene terephthalate, because you could not have got this new object, this new commodity, without that particular plastic being invented. For a long time in the history of the beverage industry, there was a struggle to find a plastic that could containerize beverages, because the existing plastics on the market were seen as chemically unstable. They could explode under pressure from carbonation. They could leach chemicals into the actual liquid. So there was constant research and development within the plastics industry to find the perfect plastic to containerize beverages, and eventually that plastic was, I won't say discovered, it was invented through this complex process of research and development in the early 70s. And that plastic was polyethylene terephthalate, and it was incredibly light, incredibly translucent, and incredibly strong. So it rapidly transformed the beverages industry. It was taken up very, very fast, and it rapidly displaced glass bottles. And in that sort of industrial transformation of plastic suddenly taking over as the dominant packaging material in the beverages industry, it also started to form new relations with water, because in the 70s and 80s, water in bottles was largely sold in glass, and it was a very boutique niche commodity. But by about the late 80s, early 90s, water started to become bottled in plastic, and it was realised that there was a very strong complementary relationship between the bottles and water. PET seemed to make water in bottles look shinier and more pure, and PET also meant that you could now carry water around with you wherever you went, because it was extremely light, it was extremely unbreakable, and so you could have this sort of sense of your own personal portable supply of water. So it was very important to look at the complexity and the history, the material history and the industrial history of how plastic and water came to form such a strong material and economic association.
So it's an industrial history, it's a technological history, it's a retailing history, but it's also a history about us in a way, isn't it? It's also about how bottled water has changed our drinking habits, and beyond our drinking habits, how, ways in which it's changed our biorhythms, if you like, and so that, and also the ways in which we're addressed as sort of like subjects of drinking. We're no longer thirsty, we're dehydrated and so on. So can you say a little bit about this impact that the bottled water has had upon us as drinking subjects, if you like?
Well, I think that, it's wrong to say that the rise of this new constant sipping subject is just the outcome of extraordinary corporate manipulation. I think that there were already subjects open to drinking more. And in many senses, the beverage corporations realised this new sort of attachment to drinking that was emerging in certain sorts of populations. Not the whole population by any means, but there was no question that in certain sorts of groups, for certain sorts of groups, they were developing new relations to their own health, and they were developing new relations to how they should care for themselves. And this is very much related to the rise of jogging and the fitness industry in the early 70s. So as that sort of, the rise of those new sorts of practices and techniques of caring for the self and attending to one's health took off, so too did research in universities around the hydration needs of the exercising subjects. So that's when you get beverage companies sponsoring the rise of sports science in universities, and that research investigated how much liquid does an exercising subject need. But that research was done on marathon runners. It was done on subjects that were putting their bodies under extreme duress. Right. But then that research got picked up by the beverage companies and then became translated and disseminated to the wider population, who then started to be told that they needed to pay attention to their hydration levels. So there's a whole lot of early marketing around bottled water which problematizes thirst, which says feeling thirsty is often not a strong indicator that you're adequately hydrated. That generally means that you're seriously dehydrated. So you need to pay much closer attention to your drinking needs, and you need to drink much more than you think than your body might feel like it. So you're really getting a reconfiguration of a biological experience, and you're getting the medicalization of thirst in a sense. You're getting scientific information and expertise being used in beverage marketing and problematizing drinking to subjects and giving them new sorts of attachments to water in which they start to think, I need to drink more, I need to pay attention to my health. And this is what we might call a new form of biocitizenship, where people start to see corporations as offering solutions to their own sorts of self-care. Okay,
so again, drinking water isn't what it used to be, and that comes across clearly. It's clearly a different act with different meanings attached to it.
Yeah.
But you made clear in what you said right at the start, and in a number of points that you've made since, that you were very hesitant about explanations that wanted to put down the new practices of water drinking that would make bottled water a villain, that would sheet all of this to the doors of something like neoliberalism or to corporations. Equally, you acknowledge that there are issues about the corporatization of bottled water that have to be addressed, but you're interested in a much more plural politics of bottled water. If bottled water is a matter of concern, it's a matter of concern in many different ways. Can you unpack what some of these key different ways are that you think are pressing and important?
Yes, that's one of the key projects of the book in a sense, to open up a different way of thinking about political processes. It seemed to us too easy and too reductionist to blame the corporation. That tends to give a very coherent and limited account to the phenomena, when it seemed to me that there were so many other sorts of political processes that were going on here. The other thing that I really wanted to wrestle with was the idea that politics happens outside of markets, that politics is a process that comes in and attacks markets, that all markets are bad. It seemed to us, when we actually researched closely what was going on here, that politics was imminent to markets, that markets were very fragile and unstable things, and that they were open to any number of forms of contestation. And that was what was evident when we looked at the number of sort of campaigns that suddenly erupted around bottled water. The other thing that was very important was we wanted to look closely at political processes empirically. We didn't take politics as self-evident, and nor did we take the politics of bottled water as obvious and self-evident. We wanted to look very closely at how this commodity and object became politically calculable. How did it become framed as a political object? And that meant that we looked very closely at the rise of what we call in the book issue politics. That bottled water is another example of the ways in which politics are changing. They are now very much focused on issues and controversies rather than just state and mainstream institutions and representative politics. We are now seeing a proliferation of controversies around any number of different issues, and many of those issues relate to the activity of markets, to the externalities of markets, to the ways in which markets seek to keep out and exclude from their frameworks all the effects that they generate. So that's what happened when we look closely at the issue activism that surrounded bottled water, that the bottle was a political object that took many different forms. There were campaigns against plastic waste, there were campaigns against what it was doing to tap water, there were campaigns against the dangers of chemical leaching, there were campaigns against the need to defend public infrastructure. So the register of political concerns around the bottle were absolutely multiple, and the nature of the political activism around it was very diverse and interesting. So it's an empirical study of political processes and political practices.
And it's an empirical study that engages with these issues and processes in a number of different countries. You focus on Australia, and I wondered if you could say a few words about what you think has been distinctive about the political issues posed around bottled water and campaigns and contestations in Australia, say, compared with one of the other countries you looked at, Vietnam.
Well, one of the interesting things about Australia is once a market faces a proliferation of issue activism around it, you often see corporations then race to kind of manage that problem. And in fact, many companies have employees who are actually called issue managers, and they are dealing with controversy. And so this was very obvious in Australia. Once a range of different activism campaigns started to emerge around bottled water, Mount Franklin, which is the largest selling brand in Australia, owned by Coca-Cola Amatil, then started to deploy a whole range of social marketing around bottled water. So it started to support breast cancer research and generate a pink lid campaign. It supported land care. It started to position the bottle in a whole range of sort of ethical realities, which in many senses are driven by the desire to redeem the bottle and to redeem the corporation. But they have to be very visible campaigns. They're just like activism. You have to be seen to be doing good with the bottle, just as activism has to be seen to be problematizing it. So they're not just doing it for their own sake. This is issue marketing in a sense. And so what the other area where Coca-Cola Amatil became very active was around the intervention in Indigenous communities and under the Howard government. And
this is the Northern Territory
intervention?
intervention?
Yes, the Northern Territory intervention. In that intervention, one of the things that was targeted was the health of Indigenous communities, and they have extremely high diabetes rates, and of course one of the reasons for that is their reliance on sweetened beverages. So, and the main culprit there would of course be the aggressive marketing of sweetened beverages in Indigenous communities. So Coca-Cola Amatil saw this as a very troubling issue. So what they did in response to that was that they started to run a healthy drinking campaigns in those communities and move Coke and Pepsi to the back of the community stores and put in Mount Franklin bottled water, and they ran a campaign saying choose water. So they turned that attack on their market into a market opportunity, and they replaced one pretty problematic commodity with a different one. But I mean, what you see there is the way in which the corporation insinuates itself into the kind of biopolitical realities of those communities by saying to that community, because one of the things that came out was that communities were drinking those sweetened beverages because they didn't have access to often cool, clean, safe water.
Good
So
state provided tap water.
Exactly. So the corporation said, well, you can't get safe water here, so we'll step in and play that role. So you see how the corporation insinuates itself into the role of being the provider of water as a common good. Instead, it's water as a private good. So that is neoliberalism in action, but it's a very specific and tiny case study that shows you how a state comes to be seen as the best way, how a corporation comes to be seen as the best way to provide public, water in this setting.
That's a fantastic example, it seems to me, of different water realities in play.
Yes,
not meeting,
rubbing up against
each other.
Yeah.
How, in the case of bottled water and its relationship to tap water and its relationship to indigenous communities, there's a whole set of complex relations that involve corporations, communities, government, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
That seems to me a really interesting note upon which to bring our discussion to a close, and to let everyone know that the book is going to be excitingly launched on Wednesday the 25th of November at Glebe Books, 49 Glebe Point Road at 6 p.m. So if you want to come, we'd like to see you there.
Thanks a lot.